NBA ranks the Chicago Bulls as 12th in the Eastern Conference in their preseason power rankings. And while I don't really like that ranking, it is kind of fair. We're going to talk about that. Plus, we could have word that Jalen Smith may have been promised by the Chicago Bulls that he'd be given an opportunity to win the starting center position. Talk about all that plus more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host there, Haize. More importantly, make sure you guys are following the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform that we happen to be on, which we will be a lot better at posting more consistently with. Listen, I told you guys very early into this process, the social media aspect of this whole podcasting thing is not my strong suit. I really, if I had my perfect world, I wouldn't be on social media at all. I'm not even going to lie to you. Yes, I have my own personal pages, but there's still some things about social media that I just look at and I'm just like, I ain't got time for you motherfuckers. Not y'all, not you. I'm talking about the randoms on social media. But nonetheless, it is what it is there, man. Make sure you guys are following the show. But let's go ahead and get into the topics for today. And so I want to start off with NBA's ranking of the Chicago Bulls in their preseason power rankings. And take preseason power rankings with a big grain of salt, right? Right now, it's a lot of opinionated based things, and a lot of it is carrying the doubt going forward as well that came from the end of last season. And so the Chicago Bulls ranked 12 out of 15 teams in the Eastern Conference. The only teams to rank below the Chicago Bulls in the preseason power rankings were the Charlotte Hornets, which I actually wouldn't be mad if they were ranked above the Chicago Bulls, just because if LaMelo Ball is going to be healthy, that really does change some things. But nonetheless, the Charlotte Hornets, the Brooklyn Nets, which we all know they're tanking, and the Washington Wizards. They even have the Detroit Pistons listed above the Chicago Bulls in this list as well. And the Toronto Raptors, another team that is going through kind of a retooling period, going younger, but they still have some really, nice pieces on that team. The Atlanta Hawks at number 9 as well. I think we finished above all those teams last season, right? And yet, all those guys are ranked above us right now. And I think this just goes double down on the doubt around the Chicago Bulls, not only in their front office, but in the coaching. They have the key additions listed for the Chicago Bulls as Josh Giddey and Modest Bucilis. They left Jalen Smith off this list, surprisingly enough, and the key departures as Alex Caruso, DeMar DeRozan, and Andre Drummond. And on paper, those are huge. Let me not say on paper. That's disrespectful. Those are huge losses to the Chicago Bulls. Huge losses. So make no mistake about it. And in this, in three numbers to know for the Chicago Bulls, they mentioned how they were outscored by 9.3 points per game from the three-point range, which that's honestly lower than I would have expected to be, if I'm being 100% honest with you. How bad we were three-point shooting-wise, as well as just not taking many, how many we gave up in clutch, the fact that we only got outscored from three by 9 points, that's 3 3-pointers. I'm actually kind of surprised by that, but it is the league's biggest discrepancy, and the Bulls haven't really done enough to get better defensively out on the perimeter, so I understand that as well. They said their opponents recorded assists on 67.9% of their field goals, which was the league's highest opponent rate. So the Bulls allow the most assisted buckets as well, and then only 44% of our opponent's shots. The league's opponent rate came in the paint, so we allowed 44% of the shots in the paint. So hey, that's lowest, right? So we're not allowing teams to get a lot in the paint, but that's probably because we give out a lot on the perimeter. And so the question with the Chicago Bulls and a lot of the doubt around the Bulls as well is just what you've seen over the last few seasons, right? They had the Bulls dropped nine spots from the last time the power rankings were done, which is huge, a huge amount. And there's a lot of doubt around the Bulls on how much the moves that they've made this season actually make them a better team. And I think that's a fair estimation, right? Like, I talk a lot about the efficiency, how players can fit together. And I do think Josh Giddey is going to have a really big statistical season. I really do think that. But how much of that is going to come into wins? There's been this doubt around from OKC Thunder fans and around general NBA fans that, yeah, Giddey can get numbers, but how much of that contributes to winning? And I think adding a player like Josh Giddey, even though he's going to come in here and be allowed to play towards his strengths, there's still a lot of doubt around, how much is that going to contribute to winning? Modest Bucilis being the rookie that we drafted as well. There's a lot of doubt around his shot, his defense, things like that. And then Jalen Smith, even though they left Jalen Smith off here, this is a guy who isn't the greatest on-ball defender, make no mistake about it, has a lot of offensive upside, an ability to stretch the floor a little bit for the Chicago Bulls, but also his shot blocking, his rim protection has gotten kind of better over years as well. But it just comes down to there's a lot of doubt. And one of the things that they marked in this, as well as saying DeMar DeRozan was the go-to guy down the stretch of close games, and the Bulls were much better in close games. 27 and 17 on those were within 5 in the last 5 minutes, and we were 12 and 26 in non-clutch. So we had a better clutch rating in games than we did not, right? 27, over half our wins, almost 2/3 of our wins came in. Oh, it's actually over 2/3 of our wins came in clutch time. And so that is a big problem and question for this Bulls team because wow, and this is why like I when people point out like, whoa, the Bulls are going to be too good to be in the lottery next year. Well, not to be in the lottery, they say to be in the have a top 10 pick, which is fair. I look at it and I say, well, that clutch record makes a big difference. Because, yeah, we're getting Zach LaVine back, and Zach LaVine, theoretically is going to score similar to what DeMar DeRozan was scoring-wise, but it's how you get those points as well, right? Like, the Bulls, they needed Kobe and DeMar to step up hugely in the clutch last season, and we haven't really seen Kobe, like, be as clutch as, like, what a DeMar DeRozan. Now, not that many players in the NBA are that clutch, so there's that as well, but there is some concern on if the Bulls get into as many close games as what they did last year, even with their new play style, things like that. Are they going to be able to pull out as many of those games because of not having DeMar DeRozan on the roster? And so you're looking at players to step up, or the Bulls change of play style. The Bulls were 28th in pace last season. 28th. I expect that to be a lot different with the rebounding of Josh Giddey and his ability to run the actual point guard. I think that we're going to be a much faster paced team, both in the starting lineup and on the bench as well. One of the reasons we'll get into here in a second. But I think that's something that's a legitimate concern. But then when you look at, like I said, some of the teams around the Chicago Bulls, the Charlotte Hornets, right? Now, I get it. The Charlotte Hornets, at least on paper, having, Brandon Phillips, having, if Mark Williams is fully healthy, they got Miles Bridges, who averaged the most points in his game, in his career per game last season. And they're hopefully having a healthy LaMelo Ball return. Make no mistake about it. Like, if LaMelo is fully healthy, I do think that this Hornets team is going to shock a lot of people and could disrupt the East a little bit. But the bigger question is he going to be healthy? I think that that's a huge question for this team. The Bulls really don't have as many big health concerns, other than if you look at Lonzo and even Zach. Like, I told you guys, the Zach LaVine health concerns are a little bit overrated, as big as what LaMelo Ball is. Now, maybe they're thinking with the growth of Brandon Miller. I said Phillips earlier. Brandon Miller and his growth, like, what does that do for the team? But, have them ranked below the Chicago Bulls makes some sense. The Brooklyn Nets, we know, is going to be tanking for sure. The Washington Wizards, again, they're the Wizards. But then you get to the teams above. The Detroit Pistons are going to be an interesting team. Now, unless they're really looking at the Detroit Pistons, which they had a really good pace last year. They were 9th in the league in pace. Unless you're looking at the change of coach, the change of GM, of being really things that really does change that team overall. I don't know if I look at the Detroit, they're a talented team, make no mistake about it. And I know they beat us a couple of times last season as well, but I just look at that Detroit Pistons team and I'm like, are they really better? They rose up considerable spots last year. They were 15th in the East in the last rankings. And I think I said earlier the Bulls dropped 9 spots. They went from 9 to 15, not dropped 9 spots overall. But that's huge, right? And then the Toronto Raptors. This is another team that I don't know what to make of this team. They have some talent on that team, make no mistake about it. They won 25 games last season, but that wasn't with the team that they're going to be starting off with. They also added Davion Mitchell to the team, lost Gary Trent Jr., but I just don't know if I clearly have them above the Chicago Bulls. And then you have the Atlanta Hawks. The Atlanta Hawks are an interesting team because I feel like we always have a better record than the Atlanta Hawks. But, they broke up some of the monotony on that on that roster, bringing in Zachary Richesher, Dyson Daniels, Larry Nance, sending out DeJounte Murray and Sadiq Bey. But overall, I just look at this and say, listen, the Bulls, I get the doubt. I get the doubt of what we've had, the talent that we've had, how we've not really maximized on that, the doubt around the front office. I think a lot of doubt around the Bulls as well comes to just NBA pundits and analysts and things don't really think highly of Arturas Karnisovas and Mark Eversley as the guys running the Chicago Bulls. And to that, listen, I can't knock you at all if that's how you feel. I can't knock you at all. They haven't shown that kind of moves that you just look at and say, this is absolutely a front office that we see is going to just continually make this team better. And because of that, it brings it's a huge amount of doubt with it right along with it. But to rank the Bulls 12th overall in that Eastern Conference, could it be bulletin board material? Could it be that the Chicago Bulls, the sum of the parts, end up outweighing and they outplay things together? Now that's up to a lot on coaching. That's up to a lot on player development. That's up to this team to find their angles in the route and do what they do really well. But defensively, this team's going to have some major issues. They're going to have some major issues defensively. And there have been some Bulls fans that I've talked to that think that the Bulls are going to be better defensively. And I'm just looking at this and saying, listen, it's not just because we lost Alex Caruso. And yeah, I would assume he was a really good on-ball defender. He doesn't get nearly the deflections. He's not as nearly the disruptor and creating new offensive opportunities as what AC did on defense yet. Listen, I've learned to never doubt a player in their growth. I would assume who's stepping into a new role, building off what he did last season. Maybe those things start changing for the team as well. Don't want to take away from that. Jalen Smith, like I said, is not a great on-ball defender, but he does some other things and kind of brings better offense. It's just how many minutes is he going to play? And then we have the overall rotation that we need to figure out. That's, like I said before, it's going to be a bit of a weird rotation. But your best starting lineup is your best starting lineup, and it's up to Billy Donovan and this coaching staff to find the right mix of guys to bring out what you need in them. And so we got a lot of guys that are going to be trying to prove it as well this season. So let's see. I don't think we're going to finish that bad in the Eastern Conference personally. Could I be wrong on that? Absolutely. I could be, right? But again, I have this team pegged to winning between 30 and like 34, 35 games next season. So, take that for what you will as well. But let me know your guys' thought. When you hear that the Chicago Bulls are ranked as 12th in the Eastern Conference in the NBA's preseason rankings, how does that make you feel? How does that get in touch with your feelings? How does that make you feel? Woosah. How does that? Anyway, with that said, let's go ahead and get into the next topic that we have for today. And that is, so I was recording an episode with Josh Lloyd over for the Locked On Fantasy Sports. This Locked On Fantasy Basketball. He's a really in-touch guy who has a great platform, but just because it's a fantasy sports show, if you guys are interested in kind of general NBA talk, he's one of the best guys to do it. Yeah, it's formed around, but he has a lot of great insight, has a lot of great connections as well. And in recording with him, he pointed this out. He said that he was told that Jalen Smith was promised either an opportunity to start or that he would eventually be the Chicago Bulls starting center. Now, again, take that with a grain of salt. Not doubting Josh Lloyd, but you just never know with sources and things like that. If Jalen Smith was truly told that he would be given an opportunity to win the starting center position, that brings me to look at a couple of different things. Is it that the Bulls do feel confident at some point this season they're going to be able to move Nikola Vucevic, and that's when he'll step into that starting center position? At that point, does Adama Sanogo come up from the G League, and then we're going with 2 6'9" centers? Which, again, Bam Adebayo, I think, should kind of make a lot of people realize that you can be 6'9" and be a solid center. And that doesn't work for everyone, but you can be. I'm not saying that that's ideal, but you can be. And so if Jalen Smith was truly offered that, how does that benefit the Chicago Bulls, right? What does Jalen Smith potentially bring that a Nikola Vucevic does not bring? And Vooch, for example, like guys know, I'm a very clear and straight shooter with Nikola Vucevic. I think that Vooch in getting you 18 and nearly 11 is still a starting caliber center. Now, I don't think you want him shooting threes. I think you need to tell Vooch to stay his big ass in the paint. And defensively, it's going to be defensively. I'll say this. Jalen Smith and Nikola Vucevic are almost neck and neck on all on-ball defense, but that weak side defense, the block shots, Jalen Smith is starting to pass Nikola Vucevic up in that, and he's a much more athletic player. But if this truly means that the Bulls are going to be giving Jalen Smith an opportunity to earn a starting role even in training camp, if it truly does turn into a camp battle for your starting center position, I think that it comes down to a couple of different things. And that's why I want to get into the positives and negatives of Jalen Smith potentially being the starting center for the Chicago Bulls. One, the athletic profile. Jalen Smith fits a lot more in with what this team looks like it's going to want to do in the starting lineup. If you were to change Jalen Smith for Nikola Vucevic, no, Jalen Smith isn't nearly the passer. He's not the passer that Nikola Vucevic is either. But I will say this, when you have two guards in Kobe White and Josh Giddey that can both do ball handling, things like that, maybe you don't need that passing well. Let me be clear. Jalen Smith he understands when to give the ball up, right? But he's not making any plays really with his passing at all. He's just a smart passer of, hey, I'm not going to get to the rim. Let me get this ball off, right? But if you're trying to adapt a quicker pace, we talked about it in the last segment, the Bulls were 28th, almost last in the league, 2 spots away from being last in the league in pace. Jalen Smith is a player that theoretically can get up and down the court with his athleticism a lot better with a Josh Giddey running that point guard position, and you look at the lob threat. He's a much better lob threat than what Nikola Vucevic would be as well in that type of case. Now, Vooch also can be a lob threat, make no mistake about it, but Jalen Smith would be better in those areas. And so you're looking at that. The weak side defense as well. Like I said, he's growing as a weak side defender. The 3-point shooting wise, and here's why I want to focus on that. While Nikola Vucevic had one season really of being a volume 3-point shooter, and the Bulls hoped that was going to be, that was right, the season the Bulls traded for him, and they hoped that he was going to be able to be that consistently, and he never was, right? Jalen Smith has been a player that has continually grown from 3-point shooting range. Now, he's a career 33% 3-point shooter, which is not great. I want to be clear on that, not great. But the Bulls could be looking at that 42% last season, taking 2.5 3-pointers per game and thinking, hey, can Jalen Smith do that here with the Chicago Bulls team, especially with a Josh Giddey that likes to cut, he can create, he can get to the rim, and Jalen Smith maybe can be out there on that perimeter. But the problem that I have with that is that, are you not doing the same thing that you tried to do with Nikola Vucevic in that case? Yes, it's a faster paced offense, but that brings some concerns, right? And Nikola Vucevic, even with his bad 3-point shooting, is a better career 3-point shooter than Jalen Smith. As a trailer, I could see Vooch, kind of, I don't want to say thriving, but I can see him hitting some trailing threes. But you have to be really confident in Jalen Smith's ability to hit that 3-point shot better than Nikola Vucevic if you're going to go with Jalen Smith as your starting center in that case, right? Jalen Smith also is a very unproven commodity. Now, that can be put in the positive or the negative section of this. But when you look at it, the only time that he averaged over 20 minutes per game was initially when he was traded to the Indiana Pacers in 2021-22. He averaged 24 minutes per game for the Pacers in that season and averaged 13.4 points per game, 7.8 rebounds per game, 1 block per game, right under an assist per game as well. He shot the ball 37% from 3-point and 53% overall from the field. And so you're asking yourself that question of the glimpses and the little bit of growth, are you willing to bet on that? Now, I do think the Bulls not being able to move Vooch maybe have changed what that promise could have been if that promise was there. But there's some possible positives and some negatives there if Jalen Smith were to be the starting center for the Chicago Bulls. You're looking at the size aspect as well, at being 6'9". I think he's listed as 215 pounds on ESPN, but I think last thing I read is he's up to like 225, almost 230. And so, that brings about its own kind of, thoughts and concerns. Now, he does have that 7'2", over 7'2" wingspan, so you're hoping that he can play bigger than what he is, right? And so if you're thinking that, then maybe that's the case as well for Jalen Smith, who also 6'9", I think maybe under. I think the last thing that I read also that he's 6'10" maybe now. So 6'10", 7'2" wingspan, that is something that you could see kind of working, right? And so I just think that this is an interesting angle to take and look at, is that if Jalen Smith is given, or if Nikola Vucevic is traded and Jalen Smith now becomes your starting center, how does that change your play style? And that's what the Bulls are probably trying to bank on if they do move Jalen into that starting center role, is that the play style that he's going to be able to play and fit in with these young guys, it fits better on paper. And we've seen that. Now, moving Vooch to the bench, that bench then gets a lot more kind of not making as much sense. Like, I like the idea of Ayo, Modest, and Jalen Smith being your 3 kind of lead players off that bench. They're going to be players that like to push that pace, thrive in that. If you put Vooch in that, are you then looking at Vooch to do more creating down low? Right now, I think there's also more situations that you can run Jalen Smith and Nikola Vucevic together as well. But you got to just look at those things. So it's just something that I heard. And when Josh Lloyd said that, I just immediately had to go to like, wait a second, what? And so we talked about it a little bit. Unfortunately, the episode was lost, so he didn't record my audio. So we're gonna have to re-record it. But yeah, it's. I just gotta look at that and say it could be something. It could be something there that maybe I kind of overlooked. So I know some Bulls fans said, hey, maybe. I think a lot of Bulls fans more so said, hey, maybe he can start in place of Patrick Williams. That may be on the table as well. But let me know what you guys think hearing that, and how does that make you feel? How does that make you feel? All right, with that said, before we get off the podcast today, if you guys can't listen, I love doing this show. I really love doing this show, and I love interacting with you guys. Even when I disagree with some of you guys, I really appreciate you guys so much, man. If I haven't said that to you guys in a couple of episodes, let me make sure. I appreciate the listeners and watchers of Chicago Bulls Central more than you guys will ever know. But before we get off this episode today, I want to talk about the back end of the bench players. I talked about the rotation in yesterday's episode. And on today's, I want to kind of look at which one of those back end of the bench players could actually surprise. Now, we talked about how Billy Donovan likes to go 9 deep. And, whoa, is that a pause? We'll see. But, he likes to go 9 players deep into his rotation, with the 10th guy kind of fluctuating and those minutes being up and down for that 10th guy. And we talked about how that could work out and who could find themselves on the outside looking in, right? And so I have a list of players here that are all either vying for that 10th spot in the rotation or just on the back end of the bench and may not be in that rotation initially. You got Torrey Craig, Chris Duarte, Ernest Batum, Dalen Terry, Julian Phillips, and Javon Carter, right? And so when you look at those guys, which guy has the biggest possibility to kind of surprise and maybe snatch a role by their level of play? Torrey Craig's a veteran. We know he's an ultimate role player. And if Patrick Williams does kind of falter, there's a high possibility Torrey Craig could be moved into that starting lineup as well. But then you look at the play style, how they train. Now, Torrey Craig does thrive in a faster paced offense. He always has in his career when you look at it, so he can be positive there. But Chris Duarte, a player that when the Bulls traded for him, a handful of Bulls fans looked at and said, hey, no, Chris Duarte is a better pickup than what people are expecting. Looking at his rookie year that he had with the Indiana Pacers, he never really quite reached those heights again, right? And so Chris Duarte is an interesting case. Like, could he earn a role with his defense, his two-way play, because the Bulls are going to need some defense? Could he get in there on that and then kind of make a name for himself? Ernest Batum has an opportunity as his three-point shooting and his shot creation in the mid-range, as the Bulls, again, are going to be at a three-point deficit. He could come in and help the Bulls there. Dalen Terry, defense energy. We're going to be missing that with Javonte Green, Alex Caruso being gone. Julian Phillips, kind of the same, but he has better scoring upside, I think, and at a position that could be need of Julian Phillips there. Would he playing the 3 and the 4? And Javon Carter, you guys know I have no hope for Javon Carter, but in fairness, in talking about this topic, there have been players that have had bad first seasons with teams when they join a new team and they kind of figure it out, they acclimate, and they're much better in their second years. So let's do process of elimination. The guard position is the deepest position the Bulls have, especially if Lonzo Ball is going to be healthy. So that right there is going to make it very slim for Javon Carter to try to make it, because he's just a point guard. I don't think you want to run him as your shooting guard. He's just your point guard. So that kind of makes it a more difficult lane for him, on top of him just playing bad as well. So then you have Chris Duarte. Kind of Torrey Craig, Chris Duarte, Ernest Batum, all wing players that can play the 2 and, well, Torrey Craig's 3 and 4. Chris Duarte, Ernest, Dalen Terry, they're 2 3s. They can play 2 or 3s. So, those guys, because of their versatility, have a chance to get on the court depending on what the situation may call for and what the Bulls need in a certain game. And then Julian Phillips is just, he's the guy that I look at and say has the best chance. The athletic profile and going to a team that's now trying to move the ball and get around faster, his shot blocking ability, his on-ball defense, his weak side defense, and he's an okay passer. And if that three-point shooting's legit, he can kind of offer a lot of mixture of all the things the Chicago Bulls could need, but it's up to Julian Phillips to show that. So if I had to pick any guy to surprise on this list, personally, I'm going with Julian Phillips with the outside chance of it being Ernest Batum as well. But let me know what you guys think. On the back end of the bench, those back end players, who are some of the ones that you think could surprise and earn a role that maybe we aren't expecting coming into the season? Let me know all that down below. Make sure you guys are following the show at Bulls Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns. BullsCentralPod@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We're the number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, but that's thanks to you guys. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See red if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.